For 19 years, he had been active. For 19 years, he had roamed his enclosure with grace and strength, captivating visitors at the Cascade Wildlife Sanctuary. But when age caught up with him and his once powerful frame grew frail, he was left behind like an afterthought. Now, in a quiet corner of the abandoned zoo, a bobcat named Ash had lost all hope. No one came to see him anymore. No one cared for him. His golden eyes, once sharp and piercing, now clouded with age, barely flickered open as he lay curled up on the cold concrete floor. The days stretched endlessly, marked only by the distant echoes of nature reclaiming what had been stolen. 6 months of silence. 6 months of emptiness. 6 months of waiting, until one man walked through the rusted gates and changed everything. Ash had been alone for nearly 6 months. 6 months of silence, of emptiness, of waiting. His meals were sporadic, left behind by the former caretaker, Greg, who visited occasionally, out of guilt more than duty. Greg knew Ash wouldn't last much longer. The bobcat barely ate, barely moved. It was as if he had already accepted his fate. "Poor guy," Greg whispered one day as he refilled Ash's water bowl. "I'm sorry, buddy." Ash's ears flicked at the sound, but he didn't lift his head. His body, once lean and strong, was now a frail shadow of what it used to be. His thick, gleaming coat had turned patchy and dull. He had given up. Until Jake walked in. Jake Miller hadn't set foot in the sanctuary in over a decade. The last time he had been here, he was just a teenager, helping his father, a former zookeeper who had loved this place as much as he loved Jake. But after his father's passing, Jake had shut the world out. Something, though, had pulled him back today. Maybe it was the unbearable silence of his own home. Or maybe it was the nagging feeling that something unfinished awaited him here. Jake walked past the overgrown pathways and empty enclosures, the remnants of what used to be a bustling wildlife sanctuary. His footsteps echoed through the emptiness until they halted in front of an enclosure at the far end of the sanctuary. He stopped. Inside lay a bobcat unlike any Jake had ever seen. Ash didn't move, didn't make a sound, didn't even acknowledge Jake's presence. A chill ran through him as he took in the sight. There was something heartbreakingly familiar in the bobcat's stillness, something that mirrored Jake's own solitude. "Who is that?" Jake asked softly. Greg let out a heavy sigh. "That's Ash. He's been here alone for 6 months." Jake knelt beside the fence, eyes locked on the motionless bobcat. Then, for just a fleeting moment, Ash met his gaze. Pain. Confusion. Loss. Jake saw it all. And then, the moment was gone. Jake's chest tightened as he stared at the frail bobcat. "How did he end up here?" he asked. Greg's voice was heavy with emotion. "The sanctuary shut down. No funding. Most of the animals were rehomed, but no one wanted Ash." Jake's fingers curled around the metal fence. 19 years, and they just left him? Greg nodded. He was a star attraction once. But now? He hesitated. Now he's just waiting to die. Jake swallowed hard. The weight of those words pressed down on him. Does he ever respond to anyone? Greg sighed. Barely. He stopped eating properly months ago. It's like he doesn't care anymore. Jake looked at Ash, watching the bobcat's slow, shallow breaths. Something inside him snapped. He reached out a hand, hovering above the fence. Ash, he whispered. The bobcat stirred slightly. Their eyes met, just for a moment. Greg placed a hand on Jake's shoulder. Don't get your hopes up. He's empty. Jake's jaw tightened. No. He's not. Without another word, he unlatched the gate and stepped inside. Greg started to protest, but stopped himself. Jake knelt beside Ash, close but not too close. I'll take him, he said firmly. Greg blinked in disbelief. Jake, he might not make it through the night. Jake nodded. Then at least he won't die alone. Greg hesitated, then finally nodded. Okay. I'll get the paperwork. Jake whispered, "You're coming home with me." The drive home was silent. Ash lay in the back seat, motionless, his breathing slow and uneven. Jake kept glancing at him in the rearview mirror, searching for any sign of life. When they arrived, Jake carried Ash inside, placing him gently on a soft blanket near the fireplace. The warmth flickered across Ash's dull coat, but he didn't move. "You're home," Jake whispered. Ash barely stirred. Jake set down a bowl of fresh food and water, waiting, hoping. But Ash didn't eat. He didn't even look at it. Hours passed. The bobcat remained curled up, eyes half closed, lost in exhaustion. Jake draped a blanket over him and sat nearby, unwilling to leave his side. As night fell, exhaustion overtook Jake. His eyes shut for what felt like moments. Then, a faint sound. Jake's eyes snapped open. Ash was gone. Panic surged through Jake as he searched the house. Then, in the dim glow of the hallway, he saw him. Ash stood, staring at a framed photograph on the wall. Jake's breath caught. It was a picture of his father, smiling, alive, holding a small bobcat cub at the sanctuary. A low, broken whimper escaped Ash's throat. Jake froze. Ash had never met his father. Yet something about that photo stirred him. "Ash?" Jake whispered. The bobcat didn't move, his golden eyes locked on the image. Jake stepped closer, heart pounding. Had Ash known his father? Was there a connection he had never realized? Slowly, he reached out. Ash flinched but didn't retreat. It wasn't much. But it was something. The next morning, Jake found Ash exactly where he had left him, curled up, unmoving, barely aware of his surroundings. But something was different. For the first time, Ash's golden eyes followed Jake as he moved across the room. There was no trust in them yet, only quiet observation. A flicker of something, curiosity, hesitation, just enough to give Jake hope. He knelt beside Ash, placing a fresh bowl of food a few inches closer than before. "You've got to eat, buddy," he murmured. Ash didn't move. Hours passed. The food remained untouched. Jake sighed, rubbing his temples. Then, an idea. He grabbed a small piece of meat, holding it in his open palm. He didn't move, didn't force it, just waited. Minutes stretched into eternity. Then, ever so slightly, Ash lifted his head. Jake held his breath. The bobcat hesitated, his nose twitching. And then, cautiously, he took the food from Jake's hand. Relief surged through Jake. His throat tightened, eyes burning. It was such a small thing. A single bite. But it meant everything. Jake exhaled shakily. "That's it," he whispered. "One step at a time." Ash licked his lips, then rested his head again. Jake knew it would be slow. But for the first time, he truly believed Ash wasn't ready to give up just yet. Neither was he. Jake couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Ash's story. The scars on his body, the quiet sorrow in his eyes, they spoke of a past filled with hardships. Determined to uncover the truth, Jake began searching through old sanctuary records. After hours of digging, he found a name, David Reynolds, a former wildlife officer. Jake drove for miles until he reached a quiet, tree-lined neighborhood. An elderly man answered the door, his weathered face tightening at the sight of the photo Jake held up. "Ash," Jake said. "What happened to him?" David's expression softened, his voice heavy with guilt. "He wasn't just any bobcat," he admitted. Ash was a trained wildlife ambassador. He helped with rescue missions, conservation efforts, he saved lives. Jake's chest tightened. "Then why did you abandon him?" David's hands trembled. "We thought we were doing what was best." He wasn't himself anymore. Age took its toll. Watching him decline, it hurt too much. Jake's fists clenched. "So you left him to die alone?" David exhaled shakily. We thought he'd be better off. I see now, we were wrong. Jake left without another word. As he drove home, he glanced at Ash sleeping in the passenger seat. I know who you are now, Jake whispered. And you're not alone anymore. Ash's tail twitched slightly in response, a silent acknowledgement in the quiet night. One morning, as Jake entered the room, his heart stopped. Ash lay motionless on the floor, his breathing faint, his body unnaturally still. Ash! Jake rushed to his side, gently shaking him. No response. Panic gripped his chest as he scooped up the frail Bobcat and carried him to his truck. The drive to the vet felt endless. Jake's knuckles turned white against the steering wheel. Hold on, buddy. Just hold on. At the clinic, Dr. Harris examined Ash, his expression grim. His body is weak. The years have taken their toll. Jake swallowed hard. Can you make it? Dr. Harris sighed. It won't be easy. You have a choice, Jake. Let him go peacefully, or fight. Jake's jaw tightened. We fight. The next weeks were grueling. Jake became Ash's constant companion, feeding him, speaking softly through the long nights, never leaving his side. There were moments of despair, times when Ash's breathing grew shallow, when hope seemed lost. But then, one night, as Jake sat beside him, Ash stirred. Slowly, weakly, he nudged Jake's hand with his nose. Jake's breath caught. It was the first sign of strength. The first sign that Ash wasn't ready to give up. Neither was Jake. Days turned into weeks. Slowly, Ash's strength returned. The frail, broken Bobcat who once lay motionless now lifted his head with renewed awareness. Then, one crisp autumn morning, Jake awoke to find Ash standing, on his own. Jake sat up, his breath catching in his throat. Ash took a tentative step, then another. His legs trembled, but he didn't stop. You did it, Jake whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Ash turned toward him, golden eyes steady, filled with something Jake hadn't seen before, trust. From that day on, their bond deepened. Ash no longer followed Jake out of fear but out of choice. He wasn't just surviving, he was living. Jake, too, had changed. In saving Ash, he had saved a part of himself. As they sat together by the fireplace one evening, Jake reached out, running his fingers through Ash's thickening fur. You're home, he murmured. Ash let out a soft, contented sigh. They had found something neither had expected, healing, purpose, and a second chance. Love and perseverance had given a forgotten warrior a new life. And in the end, that made all the difference.